After tomorrow, you're not part of this family anymore. Those were the exact words my son's fiancé whispered to me the night before their wedding. I stayed home the next day, completely broken. But by noon, the wedding had completely fallen apart, and the reason why left everyone stunned. The night before my son's wedding, I believed I was about to step into the happiest chapter of his life, and maybe the most rewarding chapter of mine. After all, I had raised him alone for 27 years, through sacrifices no one but me would ever truly understand. I gave up promotions, I skipped vacations, I learned to stretch every dollar until it nearly tore apart, just so my boy, Daniel, could grow up without feeling the weight of what we had lost when his father walked out. To me, his wedding wasn't just about him marrying the woman he loved, it was proof that I had done something right, that despite everything, I had raised a good man. At least, that's what I told myself. That evening, I stopped by the rehearsal dinner venue to deliver something I had been working on for weeks, a scrapbook of Daniel's life. It held everything, from his first steps to his high school graduation, from scraped knees and school plays to the day he received his acceptance letter to law school. I had poured my entire heart into it. I wanted his future wife, Jessica, to see just how much love and sacrifice had shaped the man she was about to marry. Jessica met me at the door. She looked stunning, as always. Perfect hair, perfect dress, perfect smile. But that night, her eyes were colder than I had ever seen them. "Jessica," I said softly, holding out the scrapbook, "I made this for Daniel. I thought it might be nice for you two to flip through it together tonight." She didn't even glance at it. Instead, she leaned closer, her voice dropping low enough that no one else could hear. "After tomorrow," she said, her lips curling into the faintest smirk, "you're not part of this family anymore." The words hit me like a fist to the stomach. I blinked, unsure if I had heard her correctly. "Excuse me?" "You heard me," she whispered. "You've done your part. You raised Daniel. Tomorrow, he becomes my husband, my family." Her gaze hardened. "And you? You're just extra baggage. Don't embarrass yourself by clinging on." I stood there frozen, clutching the scrapbook like it was the only thing keeping me upright. My throat burned, but no sound came out. She tilted her head, almost amused by my silence. "Honestly," she continued, "I've tolerated you long enough. Daniel loves you, of course, but love makes people blind. I see you for what you really are." Her voice grew colder. "Someone who doesn't belong in our future." She stepped back slightly and folded her arms. "So do us both a favor. Don't come tomorrow. Spare us all the drama." I should have said something. I should have defended myself. But instead, I felt the weight of years pressing down on me. Years of loneliness, of working double shifts, of pretending I wasn't exhausted just so my boy, Daniel, could see how hard life was without his father. And now this woman, the one who claimed to love him, was telling me I was disposable. She patted my arm as if I were a child who needed comforting. "Go home, Mrs. Miller. Sleep in. Tomorrow will be the best day of our lives, and we don't need you there to ruin it." I don't remember leaving. I don't remember the drive home. What I do remember is sitting on the edge of my bed that night, staring at Daniel's scrapbook. My hands shook so badly that the pages nearly tore. Every photograph was a memory of love, sacrifice, and perseverance. And yet tomorrow I was supposed to pretend none of it mattered, that I didn't matter. Tears blurred my vision. But beneath the heartbreak, something else began to stir, a cold, quiet anger. I whispered into the darkness, "If I'm not part of this family after tomorrow, then tomorrow I won't be there at all." And so, the next morning, I stayed home. I thought the wedding would go on without me. I thought Daniel would marry her and I would be left behind, erased from my own son's story. But by noon that day, the entire city knew. The wedding hadn't happened, and the reason why would change everything. I suppose to anyone looking from the outside, I was just another overprotective mother who didn't want to let go, but the truth was far more complicated than that. That's the label Jessica had carefully painted onto me over the years. But the truth is, I never clung to Daniel. I held him up because no one else would. When Daniel's father walked out, he didn't just leave me, he left his son too. I will never forget that night. Daniel was only 7 years old, standing in the hallway, clutching his toy dinosaur in one hand, his small voice trembling as he asked, "Mom, when is Dad coming home?" I didn't have an answer. All I had were tears I tried desperately to hide behind a forced smile. From that day forward, it was just the two of us. I became everything at once: the breadwinner, the caretaker, the cheerleader, and the disciplinarian. I worked double shifts in the hospital cafeteria, sometimes coming home so exhausted that I fell asleep still wearing my uniform. But every time Daniel came home with a gold star from school, every time he handed me a crooked Mother's Day card made from construction paper and glitter, I knew every sacrifice was worth it. Daniel grew into a man who was kind, intelligent, and ambitious. He studied harder than anyone I knew. He wanted to become a lawyer, not because of the money, but because of something he once told me that I will never forget. "Mom," he said one evening, "I want to protect people who can't protect themselves, the way you always protected me." That single sentence carried me through 1,000 sleepless nights. So when Daniel brought Jessica home for the first time 3 years ago, I truly wanted to like her. She was gorgeous, confident, and the kind of woman who seemed to light up every room she entered. Daniel was completely smitten, and all I wanted was for my son to be happy. But beneath all that charm, I noticed small cracks. She was polite to me when Daniel was around, but the moment he stepped out of the room, her tone changed. It became sharp, dismissive, as if speaking to me was an obligation she barely tolerated. She never asked about my life, my work, or even Daniel's childhood stories. Instead, every conversation seemed to drift back to her marketing career, her glamorous circle of friends, her carefully mapped out future. At first, I brushed it off. Maybe she was nervous. Maybe she just didn't know how to connect with me. But as time went on, those small cracks began to widen. Last year, on Daniel's birthday, I baked his favorite cake, chocolate fudge with peanut butter frosting. It had been our tradition ever since he turned 10. When I proudly carried it into the dining room, Jessica smiled sweetly and said, "Oh, how quaint, but Daniel's on a new diet now. I'll make sure he doesn't touch this." Before I could react, she gently took the knife out of my hand and set the cake aside, untouched. Daniel laughed it off. He kissed my cheek and said, "Thanks, Mom, you didn't have to." But I saw the flicker of guilt in his eyes. He knew I had stayed up half the night making that cake. Still, I swallowed my pride, because that's what mothers do. Every time Jessica dismissed me, every time she... That's the label Jessica had carefully painted onto me over the years. But the truth is, I never clung to Daniel. I held him up because no one else would. When Daniel's father walked out, he didn't just leave me, he left his son too. I will never forget that night. Daniel was only 7 years old, standing in the hallway, clutching his toy dinosaur in one hand, his small voice trembling as he asked, "Mom, when is Dad coming home?" I didn't have an answer. All I had were tears I tried desperately to hide behind a forced smile. From that day forward, it was just the two of us. I became everything at once: the breadwinner, the caretaker, the cheerleader, and the disciplinarian. I worked double shifts in the hospital cafeteria, sometimes coming home so exhausted that I fell asleep still wearing my uniform. But every time Daniel came home with a gold star from school, every time he handed me a crooked Mother's Day card made from construction paper and glitter, I knew every sacrifice was worth it. Daniel grew into a man who was kind, intelligent, and ambitious. He studied harder than anyone I knew. He wanted to become a lawyer, not because of the money, but because of something he once told me that I will never forget. "Mom," he said one evening, "I want to protect people who can't protect themselves, the way you always protected me." That single sentence carried me through 1,000 sleepless nights. So when Daniel brought Jessica home for the first time 3 years ago, I truly wanted to like her. She was gorgeous, confident, and the kind of woman who seemed to light up every room she entered. Daniel was completely smitten, and all I wanted was for my son to be happy. But beneath all that charm, I noticed small cracks. She was polite to me when Daniel was around, but the moment he stepped out of the room, her tone changed. It became sharp, dismissive, as if speaking to me was an obligation she barely tolerated. She never asked about my life, my work, or even Daniel's childhood stories. Instead, every conversation seemed to drift back to her marketing career, her glamorous circle of friends, her carefully mapped out future. At first, I brushed it off. Maybe she was nervous. Maybe she just didn't know how to connect with me. But as time went on, those small cracks began to widen. Last year, on Daniel's birthday, I baked his favorite cake, chocolate fudge with peanut butter frosting. It had been our tradition ever since he turned 10. When I proudly carried it into the dining room, Jessica smiled sweetly and said, "Oh, how quaint, but Daniel's on a new diet now. I'll make sure he doesn't touch this." Before I could react, she gently took the knife out of my hand and set the cake aside, untouched. Daniel laughed it off. He kissed my cheek and said, "Thanks, Mom, you didn't have to." But I saw the flicker of guilt in his eyes. He knew I had stayed up half the night making that cake. Still, I swallowed my pride, because that's what mothers do. Every time Jessica dismissed me, every time she quietly undermined me, I told myself it didn't matter. She loved Daniel. That should have been enough. Or at least that's what I kept trying to believe. The engagement should have been my moment to feel like I was gaining a daughter, not losing a son. Instead, it only widened the distance between us. Jessica took full control of the wedding planning. I wasn't invited to a single dress fitting, not one cake tasting, not even the seating chart discussion. One afternoon, I finally gathered the courage to ask if there was anything I could help with. Jessica gave me a tight smile and said, "Don't worry, Mrs. Miller, we've got it under control. Just show up looking nice, okay?" It stung more than I expected, but I smiled, nodded, and bit my tongue, for Daniel's sake, because that's what I had always done. Still, deep down, the warning signs were all along in plain sight. The way Jessica seemed far more interested in Daniel's future salary than his dreams, the way he rolled his eyes whenever he mentioned doing pro bono work, the way he introduced him at parties, not as "my fiancé Daniel," but as Daniel, the soon-to-be lawyer. Looking back now, I realize something painful. Jessica didn't see my son as a man, she saw him as a trophy. And the night before the wedding, when she finally spat those venomous words directly into my face, every warning sign I had ignored for years suddenly made perfect sense. I wasn't losing my son to love, I was losing him to ambition, to greed, to someone who saw me, his own mother, as nothing more than a loose thread that needed to be cut from her perfect picture. And the worst part? I let her. At least, until the next morning. Because the morning of the wedding, fate intervened in a way none of us could have predicted. I woke up before sunrise. For a moment, my body moved on autopilot. I boiled water for coffee, I laid out the pale blue dress I had bought months ago, the one Daniel once looked at and said, "Mom, that color looks beautiful on you." But then Jessica's words came back to me like a knife twisting in my chest. "After tomorrow, you're not part of this family anymore." I sat down at the kitchen table, staring at the steam rising from my coffee mug.
My hands were trembling, not from age, but from the weight of a decision I already knew I had made. I wasn't going. For the first time in 27 years, I was choosing myself over Daniel. Maybe it was selfish, maybe it was cowardly, but I simply couldn't bring myself to sit in that church pew, smiling politely, while watching him vow his life to a woman who had already erased me from the picture. Slowly, I placed the scrapbook back into its box. Then I slid it under my bed. He wouldn't see it today, and the painful truth was, he might never see it at all.
As the morning light spilled softly into the room, my phone buzzed again and again on the bedside table. Messages from relatives, friends, even Daniel. "Mom, we're heading to the venue now. Can't wait to see you. Where are you? Everyone's asking. You're running late, aren't you? Typical." I stared at the screen for a long moment before turning the phone face down. Somewhere deep inside me, a small voice whispered that I was making a terrible mistake. But louder than that voice was the echo of Jessica's smirk the night before, the cold confidence in her eyes, the way she had looked straight at me and quietly said that after tomorrow, I wouldn't be part of their family anymore. To her, I was baggage, an inconvenience, a relic Daniel would eventually outgrow. My chest tightened as the memory replayed. If that was what she wanted, then I would give it to her. By 9 o'clock, the calls had become frantic. My phone rang again and Daniel's name flashed across the screen. It stopped. Then a voicemail notification appeared. I hesitated before pressing play. His voice filled the quiet room, strained with worry. "Mom, where are you? Jessica says you weren't feeling well last night, but I know that's not true. Please, just call me back. Please." I pressed the phone against my chest, closing my eyes. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to grab my coat, jump in the car, and race to the church. To be there for my son, the boy I had raised through every storm life threw at us. But something inside me had finally broken, and broken things don't always heal in time. At 10:45 sharp, someone knocked on my door. Hard. When I opened it, my sister Rebecca stood there in her bridesmaid's dress, slightly out of breath from climbing the steps. "Margaret," she said sharply, pushing past me into the living room, "what on earth are you doing?" She turned around, staring at me in disbelief. "Everyone's looking for you. The ceremony starts in an hour." I shook my head slowly. "I'm not going." Her jaw dropped. "Not going?" she repeated, as if the words were in a foreign language. "Are you insane? Your only son is getting married today." Tears welled in my eyes as I met her gaze. "He's marrying someone who told me to my face that I'm not part of his family anymore." Rebecca blinked. "What?" "Jessica," I said quietly. "Last night, she looked me in the eye and told me that after the wedding, I wouldn't be welcome in their lives anymore." The color drained from Rebecca's face. "She said that?" I nodded. "She made it very clear she didn't want me there today, so why should I go?" Rebecca sank slowly into the nearest chair, her hands falling into her lap as the reality settled in. For several long seconds, neither of us spoke. The only sound in the room was the steady ticking of the wall clock. Finally, she whispered, "Oh my God." I swallowed hard. I'm not going to sit in that church pretending I belong somewhere I've already been pushed out of. Rebecca rubbed her forehead, clearly torn. "But Margaret, if you don't show up, people will blame you," she said softly. "They'll say you abandoned your son on his wedding day." A bitter laugh escaped my lips. Let them. I walked toward the window, watching as neighbors climbed into their cars dressed in suits and elegant gowns. "I've been judged my whole life," I said quietly. "What's one more accusation?" At 10:45 sharp, someone finally left my house to return to the church. My house fell silent again. My car keys sat untouched on the kitchen counter. I never picked them up. When the church bells began ringing at 11, announcing the start of the ceremony, I sat alone on my bed, staring at the scrapbook tucked beneath it. 27 years of memories. Daniel's first steps, his first day of school, the night he graduated college. Moments that had once felt like the center of the universe. I thought that was where my story ended. A mother too broken, too humiliated to stand beside her son on the most important day of his life. But at exactly noon, my phone rang again. Rebecca. Her voice was shaking. "Margaret," she whispered. My stomach tightened. "What happened?" "The wedding," she said slowly. "It's not happening." My breath caught in my throat. "What do you mean it's not happening?" Her next words tumbled out in a rush. "Jessica been exposed." I sat up straight. "Exposed? What are you talking about?" "You need to hear this from me before it spreads everywhere," Rebecca said. "Daniel found out the truth minutes before the ceremony." My knees felt weak. I sank onto the couch. "What truth?" Rebecca exhaled shakily. "That Jessica has been lying about everything." Later, as frantic phone calls and shocked messages poured in from guests who had witnessed the chaos firsthand, the story came together piece by piece. At 10:30, just half an hour before the ceremony, Daniel was waiting nervously in a small side room inside the church. His groomsmen surrounded him, trying to keep things light. One adjusted his tie, another cracked jokes, but the tension in the room was thick. Then suddenly, the door burst open. Daniel's best friend, Mark, rushed in, pale as a ghost. "Daniel," he said urgently, holding his phone, "you need to see this." Daniel frowned. "What is it?" Mark hesitated before turning the screen towards him. On it were photographs. Clear. Undeniable. Jessica wrapped in the arms of another man. Daniel's face went white. The room fell silent. "What is this?" he whispered. Mark's voice trembled. "My neighbor sent these to me this morning. He said you deserved to know before you made the biggest mistake of your life." The photos weren't old. They were taken just 2 weeks earlier. Jessica and the man laughing together outside a restaurant, holding hands in a parking lot, kissing. Daniel staggered backward, gripping the edge of a table to steady himself. "Who is that?" one of the groomsmen asked quietly. Daniel already knew the answer. The man wasn't a stranger. He was Jessica's boss, the same boss she had talked about endlessly, the one she claimed was mentoring her career. Suddenly, everything made sense. The late nights at the office, the secretive phone calls, the way she brushed off Daniel's concerns with a laugh and a quick kiss. It had all been a lie. She had been cheating on him. But that wasn't even the worst part, because as guests began filling the church, whispers started spreading like wildfire through the crowd. Jessica's maid of honor, nervous, tipsy from too much champagne, had accidentally let something slip. Jessica hadn't just been having an affair, she had also been planning something far more calculated, something that would have destroyed Daniel completely if the truth hadn't surfaced just in time. And when the full story finally came out, it left the entire church in stunned silence. Her family had pushed her into the engagement because Daniel was on the verge of launching a lucrative law career. To them, marriage had never been about love. It was business, a transaction, a merger between opportunity and ambition. The prenuptial agreement Jessica had insisted on drafting wasn't about protecting Daniel's future. It was carefully designed to funnel control of his growing assets into her hands. Her father, a businessman with a long trail of bankruptcies behind him, had even bragged openly to one of the guests that once Jessica married Daniel, all their financial troubles would disappear. By the time Daniel stormed into the bridal suite, his hands were shaking with barely controlled rage. Jessica, glowing in her gown, turned toward him with a bright smile. "Sweetheart," she said lightly, "are you ready?" Daniel held up his phone. What the hell is this? Her smile faltered. For the first time, the perfect mask cracked. That's not what it looks like, she started quickly. It's exactly what it looks like, Daniel roared. 2 weeks ago, with your boss. Her bridesmaids gasped. The room fell completely silent. Jessica's voice sharpened instantly. Daniel, listen to me. No, he said, his voice breaking. You listen. You told my mother she wasn't part of this family. You tried to cut out the one person who has always been there for me. And all this time, you were lying straight to my face. Your mother? She snapped. Is that what this is about? She's been poisoning you against me from the start. She's jealous, Daniel. She doesn't want to let go. But the words landed with no power at all. Because in that moment, Daniel finally understood something important. I had never needed to poison him against Jessica. Jessica had done that all on her own. By 11:15 that morning, the church was in chaos. Guests whispered, gasped, and checked their phones as the story began spreading down the pews like wildfire. The pastor tried desperately to restore order, but Daniel walked down the aisle alone, not with a bride, but with an announcement. There will be no wedding today, he said, his voice shaking but steady. Jessica has betrayed my trust. This ceremony is canceled. Gasps echoed through the church. Jessica's parents shot to their feet in outrage. Her mother shrieked, "Don't you dare humiliate our daughter like this!" But Daniel didn't back down. She humiliated herself. Jessica, furious and desperate, chased after him down the aisle, shouting about lies, misunderstandings, and twisted stories. But the photos didn't lie, and neither did the growing whispers about her true intentions. By noon, the guests were filing out of the church in stunned silence. Some shook their heads. Some muttered angrily about wasted money and ruined plans. Others whispered sympathy for me, even though I hadn't been there at all. When my sister finally finished relaying everything over the phone, I sat frozen in my chair, the receiver pressed tightly to my ear. My heart ached for Daniel, for the heartbreak he didn't deserve. But beneath that sorrow, another feeling slowly began to bloom. Vindication. Jessica had told me I wasn't part of the family, and now there was no family for her to claim. I whispered quietly into the phone, almost to myself. She wanted me gone, but she's the one who's gone now. That should have been the end of Jessica's story, but it wasn't, because people like Jessica rarely disappear quietly when they lose everything, and I was about to discover just how far she and her family were willing to go to claw back what they believed belonged to them. For the rest of that day, my phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Friends, neighbors, distant relatives, everyone was calling, texting, forwarding links to social media posts. The canceled wedding had exploded across the internet. One headline read, "Law student calls off wedding minutes before ceremony after fiancé's secret affair exposed." But another post, far more venomous, caught my attention. "Mother-in-law sabotages wedding, tears family apart." My stomach dropped. Jessica's family had already started rewriting the story. By evening, whispers had begun circulating that I was the real reason the wedding had fallen apart, that I had filled Daniel's head with lies about Jessica, that I had convinced him not to marry her. It was absurd. Daniel had seen the photos with his own eyes, but lies travel faster than truth, and Jessica's parents were experts at performance. At one point, Jessica herself posted a photo online. She stood in her ruined wedding dress, mascara streaked down her cheeks. The caption read, "Some people just can't let go. Some mothers don't know when to stop." The comments flooded in almost instantly. Strangers offering sympathy, friends demanding to know what kind of mother would sabotage her own son's happiness. I wanted to scream. I wanted to shout the truth from the rooftops, but Daniel begged me not to respond. "Mom," he said quietly, "don't stoop to her level. Everyone close to us knows what really happened." The problem was, not everyone close to us actually knew. Some people believed her. Some people questioned me. Even people I had known for years started asking uncomfortable questions. "Margaret, did you really tell Daniel not to marry her?" Those words cut deeper than I expected. After everything I had sacrificed, after everything Jessica had done, I was still the villain in someone else's story. And then things got worse. 2 days later, a letter arrived in my mailbox. A legal letter. Jessica's family was threatening to sue me. Defamation, emotional damages, even interference with contractual relations. They weren't just trying to rewrite the story anymore. They were trying to turn me into the criminal. I stared at the paper, my hands trembling. The legal language twisted across the page like a threat written in another language. Interference with contractual relations. What did that even mean? I didn't waste time trying to decode it alone. I drove straight to my friend Linda's office downtown. Linda had worked in law for nearly 15 years, and if anyone could make sense of the intimidation printed on that letterhead, it was her. She adjusted her glasses, skimmed the document once, then again, more slowly. Finally, she let out a small scoff and tossed it gently onto her desk. "Margaret," she said, leaning back in her chair, "this isn't a lawsuit. This is intimidation." I frowned. Intimidation? "They're trying to scare you," Linda said plainly. "Interference with contractual relations is a fancy legal phrase, but in this situation it's meaningless. What they're really saying is that you ruined their financial plan." "Financial plan?" I repeated, confused. Linda studied me carefully, as if deciding whether I already knew the answer to the next question. "Margaret, didn't you know Jessica's family is bankrupt?" The room suddenly felt colder. "What?" Her voice softened, but the words were brutal. "Her father lost millions in failed investments, bad real estate deals, risky ventures, loans he couldn't repay. They've been sinking for years." My stomach twisted. They needed Jessica's marriage to Daniel to stabilize their finances. Linda slid another document toward me, the prenup. "The one her father insisted on drafting," she continued. "It wasn't written to protect Daniel, it was written to protect them." I leaned closer to read, and the more I read, the worse it became. "If Daniel had signed this," Linda said quietly, "a significant portion of everything he earned over the next 10 years would have been routed into joint financial structures that, coincidentally, Jessica's family controlled." My blood ran cold. "This wasn't about marriage," she added. "This was an acquisition." For a moment, I couldn't speak. So it had never been about love, not even for a second. It had been about money, control, security. And when I refused to attend the wedding, when I refused to play my assigned role in their carefully crafted performance, Jessica had seized the perfect opportunity. She couldn't risk people seeing her for what she was, greedy, manipulative, unfaithful. So she did the only thing left. She changed the story. Overnight, I became the villain, the bitter, controlling mother, the jealous woman who couldn't bear to lose her son. I had to admit something with reluctant admiration. It was brilliant, cruel, but brilliant, and the harassment began almost immediately. Anonymous messages flooded my inbox. "Monster, jealous old hag, you ruined your son's life." Some were emails, some were texts from unknown numbers. A few even appeared as handwritten notes slipped into my mailbox. Jessica's family wasn't finished, not even close. Then, one afternoon, about a week later, I came home to find Daniel sitting on my couch. He looked exhausted, pale. In his hands was a letter nearly identical to the one Linda had just dismissed. "They're threatening me too, Mom," he said quietly. I sat across from him, my chest tightening. "What do they want?" Daniel ran a hand through his hair. "Jessica's father says if I don't publicly clear her name, he'll sue you." My heart skipped. "He says he'll drag you through court, financially ruin you." The words hung heavy in the room. "What did you tell him?" I asked carefully. Daniel's jaw tightened. "I told him to go to hell." Pride flickered in my chest, but it was quickly replaced by concern. I could see the worry behind his eyes. Daniel had just finished law school, student loans, a career barely beginning. Even a ridiculous lawsuit could drain him financially before he ever got his footing. "Mom," he whispered, his voice cracking slightly, "I don't know how much more of this I can take." My heart ached. For 27 years, I had carried him through every storm life threw at us. Now he was trying to shield me. But this wasn't a storm that silence could outlast. This wasn't gossip or family drama. This was war. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling. And suddenly, I remembered something Jessica had once said during one of her smug little lectures months earlier. "You don't understand, Mrs. Miller. In this world, perception is everything. People believe what they see." She was right. People believed her because she played the role perfectly. Beautiful, heartbroken, the innocent victim of a cruel mother-in-law. If perception was her weapon, then truth would be mine. Not whispered, not hidden, but exposed, publicly. Because Jessica's betrayal wasn't just emotional, it was financial manipulation, possibly even fraud. And once the truth came out, no amount of crocodile tears would save her. I didn't realize it yet, but the next chapter of this battle wouldn't be fought through rumors or social media. It would be fought somewhere far more dangerous, a courtroom. And this time, I wouldn't stay silent. For weeks, Jessica's smear campaign continued. Her family pushed their narrative everywhere, at social gatherings, through mutual friends, even online. I was the jealous mother, the controlling parent who sabotaged her son's happiness. And for a while, they believed it. They might have continued believing it if not for one simple truth. The truth has a way of clawing its way to the surface. I spent days collecting evidence, old emails, screenshots Daniel had saved, copies of the prenup Jessica's father had drafted, laced with clauses so predatory it looked less like a marriage agreement and more like a corporate takeover. Linda connected me with a financial investigator. Within a week, we uncovered the full picture. Jessica's family wasn't just struggling financially, they were collapsing. Bankruptcies, outstanding debts, multiple lawsuits stretching back nearly a decade. They hadn't wanted Jessica to marry Daniel for love. They wanted his future, his salary, his reputation, his career. The prenup had been their golden ticket. Armed with the truth, I knew exactly what I had to do. 2 weeks later, Jessica's family hosted a damage control dinner at a luxury hotel downtown. They invited Daniel, claiming they wanted to talk things through like adults. Daniel begged me not to attend. "Mom, please," he said, "they'll ambush you." But I already knew something he didn't. If I didn't confront them now, they would never stop. So that evening, I walked into that hotel ballroom wearing the pale blue dress I had bought for the wedding, the dress I never got to wear. Jessica's parents sat at the head of the table. Jessica herself sat beside them in a sleek black dress, her posture perfect, her smile sharp enough to cut glass. Her father noticed me first. "Well," he said smoothly, leaning back in his chair, "look who decided to join us." Jessica tilted her head slightly. "Mrs. Miller," she said sweetly, "we were just discussing how to resolve this unfortunate misunderstanding." I stepped closer to the table. "Misunderstanding?" I repeated calmly. "You mean the affair or the fraud?" Jessica's smile flickered. Only for a second. "You're still clinging to those ridiculous lies?" she replied coolly. Without another word, I placed a thick folder on the table. The sound echoed softly in the quiet room. "Then perhaps you can explain these." Jessica's father's expression tightened as he opened the folder. Financial records, bankruptcy filings, court documents, and finally, the prenup. I tapped the page gently. Clause 14, subsection 3. Silence filled the room, because that clause didn't just describe a marriage agreement, it described exactly how Daniel's income would be quietly redirected into accounts tied directly to Jessica's family. And for the first time since this nightmare began, Jessica looked afraid. I stared at the document, letting the silence stretch long enough for the words to settle over the room like a storm cloud. In the event of divorce within the first 5 years, 75% of Daniel Miller's income shall be transferred into accounts held jointly by Jessica Hayes and her father, Richard Hayes. The sentence hung in the air. A wave of gasps rippled around the table. Even Daniel, who had skimmed the document before but never truly studied it, turned pale as the meaning finally sank in. His eyes moved slowly from the paper to Jessica. "You were planning to gut him," I said quietly, my voice cold and steady. "You wanted his future earnings to bail out your family's failures." Jessica's father flushed a deep, angry crimson. "You have no right to—" "I have every right," I cut in sharply, "because you dragged my name through the mud. You painted me as a jealous, bitter woman trying to sabotage this marriage. But now everyone will see the truth." I leaned slightly forward, my gaze locked on Jessica. "You weren't marrying Daniel into your family," I said. "You were marrying his bank account." Jessica's eyes narrowed into thin slits. "You wouldn't dare make this public." I met her stare without blinking. "Watch me." The confrontation exploded into chaos. Jessica immediately began insisting that the photos of her affair were fake. Her father threatened lawsuits. Her mother started crying about family unity and misunderstandings. Voices overlapped, chairs scraped across the floor. But Daniel didn't flinch this time. He stood slowly, his hands shaking slightly, his voice trembling, but firm. "You lied to me," he said. Jessica's expression shifted instantly. The anger vanished, replaced by soft desperation. "Daniel, please," she whispered, reaching for his hand. "I made mistakes, yes, but it was you I wanted, not your money." He pulled his hand away. "If that were true," he said quietly, "you wouldn't have tried to erase my mother." The room went completely silent. "You wouldn't have told her she wasn't part of my family." Jessica froze. For the first time since the confrontation began, she had no response. The words she'd thrown so casually the night before had returned like a blade. Her composure cracked, desperation spilling through the fractures. "She's turning you against me." Daniel shook his head slowly. "No," he said, his voice breaking slightly. "You did that all on your own." That night, I expected the confrontation to end in screaming, in threats, in shattered promises and slammed doors. Instead, it ended with Daniel walking out of that hotel. My arm linked through his. Behind us, Jessica followed into the hallway, shouting his name, first angry, then pleading, then sobbing. "It isn't what it looks like. Daniel, please. I love you." But for the first time, he didn't look back. By the time we reached the parking lot, Daniel stopped beside the car. His eyes were red, his face pale, but there was a new steadiness in his voice. "Mom," he said quietly, "I should have listened to you." I pulled him into my arms, holding him the same way I had when he was a frightened little boy with scraped knees and tear-stained cheeks. "You see it now. That's all that matters." But as we drove away, Jessica's words echoed in my mind. "You wouldn't dare make this public." She was wrong, because if Jessica Hayes wanted a war of perception, then perception was exactly what she was going to get. And when the truth came out, her carefully constructed facade would collapse beyond repair. In the days following the confrontation at the hotel, Jessica and her family tried everything: threats, pleas, promises. Her father sent Daniel long emails packed with legal jargon, insisting he had every right to pursue damages. Her mother left tearful voicemails begging Daniel to be reasonable. Jessica herself swung wildly between fury and desperation. One moment she was swearing she would ruin us. The next she was whispering that she still loved him. But it was too late, because this time the truth wasn't confined to whispers inside a ballroom. This time I made sure everyone knew. With Linda's help, I handed the prenup documents and financial records to a journalist known for exposing financial schemes and predatory contracts. Within a week, the article went live. Canceled wedding, the Hayes family's financial scheme uncovered. The piece was devastating. It detailed the bankruptcies, it exposed the predatory prenup clause, it outlined the suspicious financial history of Richard Hayes. It even hinted, carefully but unmistakably, at the affair that had detonated the wedding before it could even begin. For the first time, the world saw the story not through Jessica's tear-streaked Instagram posts, but through cold, documented evidence. And almost overnight, the tide turned. Comments flooded in across social media and news forums. So she wanted his paycheck, not his heart. That poor mother-in-law. Imagine raising your son alone only to be told you're not family. Jessica Hayes isn't a victim. She's a gold digger. The sympathy that had once been denied to me poured in like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. But more importantly, Daniel finally felt free. Though the betrayal had left deep scars, he began rebuilding his life piece by piece. He threw himself into his new position at the law firm, determined to build a future defined by his own work, not someone else's manipulation. And slowly, the heaviness in his eyes began to lift. For the first time in months, he started smiling again. Not the tense, forced smile he used to wear around Jessica, the real one. One evening, we sat together on the porch with cups of tea, watching the sunset paint the sky in warm gold and amber. Daniel reached over and squeezed my hand. "Mom," he said softly, "I don't know how you stayed so strong. She nearly broke me." I looked at him, the little boy I once carried on my hip, now a man who had walked through betrayal and come out stronger. "Because I've been through worse," I said gently, "and because I knew one day you'd see her for who she truly was." He nodded slowly. "It just took time." His eyes glistened. "You were always my family." I squeezed his hand back. "Always."